Hi guys, welcome back to Real Watches. I'll be doing this video today, which is part of a new series called Value Prop. So in this new series, we'll be discussing watches that we don't necessarily own, so it's not like a review, but watches that we think offer good value in the market for you guys and other collectors. So this is episode 1, and it's on Vintage Tudor. This is actually quite close to me because I own one. This is my Vintage 7934. And so obviously I think they're good value because I've spent my own money on one. And I want to explain to you guys why that is. So in case you don't know, Tudor is a Swiss brand which was founded by Hans Wilsdorf as a sister company to complement Rolex's offering. And while Tudor was founded in 1926, it has spent a lot of its time as that sister brand that really just produced cheaper versions of popular Rolex models. Currently, however, you might be pretty aware of Tudor as quite a big player, especially in the sports watches category. In 2012, they released their Black Bay line of watches, which were really commercially successful. And I think it's fair to say that this line of watches has been very popular with the collector community and for people who can't currently acquire modern Submariners. But that's a whole topic for another day. So as I've said, Tudor is probably most recognised in its modern form, with its own lines of watches and all the success they've had there. However, as I've mentioned, they spent so long in Rolex's shadow making really rebranded Rolexes with cheaper movements, and I think that's the part of their history that really offers the great value for collectors right now. The main reason I say that is the Rolex equivalent watches from that era are so unobtainium right now. This price inflation has meant that some of these Grail Rolexes have inflated to prices that are just unrealistic for many, many collectors, and that's why I think Vintage Tudor really comes into its own. Before I list off these watches, I want to make it clear that I don't believe that if you're looking to buy a Rolex for the sake of the brand, that it's a good idea to try to save money by buying a Tudor. It's not the same, people won't recognise it as much and won't give you as much, I guess, respect for owning it, if that's what you're looking for. But honestly, that can be a positive sometimes, because people won't tend to judge you if you're wearing a Tudor as much as they will if you're wearing a Rolex. If you're buying the Rolex for the clout, I guess ignore this. These Tudors aren't really for you. So the watches I'd like to focus on are as follows. Firstly, I believe the most desirable vintage Tudors tend to be dive watches. These are referred to as the Tudor Submariner, which obviously is just Tudor's version of the Rolex Submariner. They were happy to share branding back then, doesn't happen so much anymore, hence the Black Bay line. In addition to the normal Tudor Submariner with the Mercedes hands and fairly normal dial, although obviously very vintage and period correct, there's also the Tudor Snowflake, which is what inspired the Tudor Pelagos in the modern line of watches, which I think does give you some cool Rolex feel, but also has a very unique twist, which makes it very Tudor. These watches use off-the-shelf ETA movements, as I said, cheaper alternatives to ones Rolex were using at the time, although obviously Rolex was not in-house at that point, if you didn't know. The majority of Submariners were automatic, however there is one exception of a manual wind example, which is the 1955 7923, which has pencil hands, which is quite a good ode to the earliest Submariners, and therefore is quite collectible. So across these Submariner and Submariner Snowflake models, there's a great bit of range, both in rarity, options. It's also a fair bit of range in price because some vintage Tudors have appreciated, like the Rolex market, but many not to the same extent, and definitely not to the extremes that we've seen with Rolex. Now, while in this video I've used the word vintage, Tudor technically produced the Submariner up until 1999, so while I prefer a lot of the watches from the 50s, 60s and 70s, if you're not someone who's so attracted to these kind of models, you can still find watches from the 80s and 90s which bear more resemblance to modern watches, which offer great value as more modern alternatives and are still really classic in their design. Okay, so the next watch that I'm a particular fan of are the dress watches, which I think will interest a lot of other collectors as well, who may be currently considering or dreaming of Rolex Oyster Perpetuals or Date Justs. These are, of course, Tudor Oysters and the Oyster Prince line of watches. Now, my personal Tudor falls into this category as it's a Tudor Oyster, so you could say I'm biased, that's a very fair point. I do think these watches can offer a lot, especially if you find the right one for you. So, luckily, for finding the right watch, Tudor made a huge variety of these. Firstly, they come in manual or automatic movements. The automatic movements, especially on Chrono 24, are a lot more common, but the manual ones like mine can offer some more charm, it'd be a bit less practical for some people. In terms of dial color, you get kind of the classic Rolex palette, a lot of black, silver, champagne, grey, also some really nice blue dials that Tudor made, and a lot of them are nicely sunburst like their Rolex counterparts are. They also come in a range of sizes like the Rolexes do. The watches are primarily 34mm in diameter and 36mm in diameter, like the Rolex Date 1500 and the Date Just 1601. And even there are some, if you can find them, rarer jumbo-sized watches which are 38mm, which might be good for a larger wrist, or someone who just prefers a more contemporary size. The other key factor when you're considering one of these watches is what complications you want. So obviously, the most common is date complication, as a lot of them were like Rolex Dates or Rolex Date Justs. However, there are also something called the Tudor Date Day, which is Tudor's version of a day date. These are really cool watches, in my opinion, as they firstly come in steel, so they're a lot more daily wearable, and obviously, like most watches on this list, a lot less expensive than their Rolex counterparts. The final watch I want to talk about are the Tudor Oyster Date chronographs, which were originally produced from 1970 through to the 90s. These are double and triple register chronographs with a date function, and with many dial layouts unique to Tudor, it's easy to distinguish them from their Rolex counterparts. The reason this dial layout is different on these Tudors is due to the use of Valjoux movements for these watches. These include Valjoux 7734s, Valjoux 223s, and the Valjoux 7750. So some of these watches have appreciated quite a lot, especially probably the most famous reference being the Monte Carlo reference 7149 from 1971. This is just appreciated because it's really unique colour palette, and that clearly has drawn a lot of high-end collectors to collecting this watch. However, if you end up settling with a simpler Panda or reverse Panda dial, these watches can be found around £6,000 British, which I think is where the value really lies for collectors. So there's the video explaining why I think Vintage Tudor is a good value prop at the moment. I will talk about my personal Tudor in another video. We've got that lined up because it's quite a complex story. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. If you want to see more of our content, go follow us on Instagram @ReonWatches. And we'll see you next time.